Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The monarchy woke to a decision so sharp, so personal, and so final that even seasoned palace aides fell silent before repeating it aloud. William had not simply challenged Camilla's position. He had moved against something older, deeper, and far more symbolic: the Queen Mother's reserved properties and funds. And in that single order, a private royal dispute became a constitutional earthquake wrapped in family betrayal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood alone in a private palace room, reading the final order once, then again, as if the words might grow less dangerous the second time. They did not. The Queen Mother's reserved properties and funds, private family assets and money protected for a specific royal legacy, had long been treated as more than wealth. They carried memory, they carried loyalty, they carried the quiet idea that some parts of the monarchy should never be touched by personal ambition. The prince set the page down with controlled care, but his face carried the weight of what he had just done. He had formally stripped Camilla of access to those reserved properties and funds, moving control away from her office and placing it under direct Prince of Wales oversight, meaning his own household would now guide the decisions. It was clean, it was official, and it was devastating. Camilla received the notice without speaking. Her hand tightened around the edge of the paper, as her eyes found one word that seemed to burn through every careful sentence around it: revoked. The Queen Consort had survived public judgment, private whispers, and years of cold palace memory. But this felt different. This was not a rumor outside the gates. This was a decision from inside the family, and it told her exactly where William believed the line had to be drawn. Charles knew before she did. The king had seen the order coming, had understood the damage it would cause, and still chose not to stop it. That silence became its own confession. He was not only protecting William, he was allowing Camilla to feel the full force of a judgment that had been prepared in advance, reviewed quietly, and held until one final incident made delay impossible. The closed door changed everything. A decision that looked like money on paper had become a battle over trust, power, and the future shape of the crown after Charles. William had acted. Camilla had been cut off, and before the palace could understand the order itself, it had to confront the people standing at the center of it: the prince, the queen consort, and the king caught between them. Behind every royal decision stands a human cost, and this one carried three faces, marked by very different wounds. William saw duty. Camilla saw humiliation. Charles saw a family fracture unfolding under the same roof he was supposed to command. The order had legal language, official seals, and careful wording, but its real power came from the private emotions it exposed in people trained never to show them. William stopped outside Charles's study with his hand near the door, breathing slowly before he entered. The Prince of Wales, the title given to the heir next in line after the king, was no longer acting like a son asking for approval. He was acting like a future king guarding inheritance, royal discipline, and the Wales line. That mattered because the decision did not touch only Camilla's comfort. It touched the structure that would one day protect Catherine, their children, and the monarchy William would inherit. Camilla sat alone after the notice arrived. No aides beside her, no comforting voice softening the blow. The Queen Consort, the wife of the reigning monarch, honored beside him but not ruling in her own right, had treated the reserved properties and funds as a sign that she had finally been accepted inside the royal system. They were not just administrative privileges to her. They were proof that the doors once closed to her had opened, proof that memory had made room for her name. Charles remained silent longer than anyone expected. The king understood that silence could sometimes calm a crisis, but this time it sharpened one. He did not defend Camilla immediately. He did not challenge William in front of the household. And in that hesitation, the staff sensed something dangerous. Power was moving, quietly but clearly, from the monarch who wore the crown to the heir already preparing to carry it. William chose every word before he crossed into the study. He knew Camilla would see the order as punishment, and he knew Charles would feel it as betrayal. But the prince also knew that Catherine's name, though absent from the document, lived inside the decision. Her influence was not loud. It did not need to be. The future king had begun securing his own household against any confusion that could one day weaken his family. Camilla stared at the closed door as if the palace itself had stepped away from her. The queen consort had survived harsh headlines, cold rooms, and years of judgment, but this wound came from inside. Charles's silence hurt because it left her alone. William's resolve hurt because it left no path back. The pain was personal. The message was larger. And to understand why the prince crossed a line no heir had crossed before, the story must move backward to the hidden incident that turned concern into action. Every palace crisis has a moment people later remember differently. The pause before a sentence, the glance across a table, the silence after a name is spoken. For this crisis, the trigger was not a public scandal. It was a private dinner at Clarence House, where one remark about the Queen Mother's legacy changed the temperature of the room and placed William on a path he would not abandon. Camilla had arrived believing the evening would remain controlled. Clarence House, the royal residence long used for private family meetings and official work, had always offered a softer stage than the larger palaces, a place where tense matters could be wrapped in polite conversation. Yet beneath the calm surface, pressure had been building for weeks. Her office wanted wider discretion over the Queen Mother's reserved assets, meaning more say over properties, access, and fund-related privileges that had once been kept carefully separate from court politics. William listened at first without interrupting. Catherine sat near him, quiet but alert, sensing the prince had already heard enough to understand where the conversation was going. Camilla spoke carefully, then sharpened her tone when she questioned whether William's household should really hold final influence over Queen Mother-linked properties. Then came the sentence no one forgot. She called the arrangement outdated family sentiment. William froze. The prince lowered his glass without drinking, and that small movement told Catherine everything. He had not raised his voice. He had not struck back. But the future king had marked the line in his mind, and Camilla, watching him from across the table, suddenly understood that her words had landed in a place deeper than policy. Charles did not correct her. The king heard the remark, felt the silence gather around it, and still allowed the moment to pass. That choice mattered, because his silence gave William no reassurance that the Queen Mother's legacy would be defended from within the present reign. It also left Camilla exposed, because she tried to soften the remark too late, smiling as if the damage could be folded back into dinner conversation. A senior aide later retrieved old instructions connected to the Queen Mother's wishes. Those instructions, recorded in a documented household account kept for internal reference, gave William more than emotion. They gave him a foundation. They showed that certain properties and funds had always been meant to remain protected from personal court influence, and that discovery strengthened his argument far beyond anything Camilla expected. The dinner became known privately as the Clarence House breach. Not because anyone shouted, not because anyone stormed out, because that was the night William stopped seeing the matter as family discomfort and began seeing it as royal risk. The paper trail had been gathered, the emotions had hardened, and the next time the prince and Camilla faced each other, the room did not feel like family anymore. There are royal conversations designed to preserve dignity, and there are conversations that reveal dignity has already been lost. When William met Camilla behind closed doors, the air carried the weight of every unsaid resentment between them. No cameras, no public smiles, no carefully arranged seating for ceremony. Just a future king, a queen consort, and a decision neither could soften without surrendering. William entered the private Buckingham Palace sitting room, with the file held flat against his side. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main working headquarters, where official decisions are shaped and carried through, gave the meeting a weight no family room could soften. Charles was already there, standing near the desk, while Camilla sat with her hands folded too tightly in her lap. The king looked older in that moment, not because of illness or age, but because he knew every word spoken next would wound someone he loved. Camilla lifted her chin before William sat down. The queen consort understood that this was not a casual discussion. She could feel it in Charles's silence, in the sealed file, in the way the prince refused to begin with apology. William explained that access to the Queen Mother's reserved properties and funds would no longer pass through her office under any circumstance. The words were steady. The meaning was brutal. Her influence had not been reduced. It had been removed. Camilla stood too quickly, and the chair scraped hard against the floor. She asked whether William understood the insult he was delivering, whether he understood what it meant to strip her office of authority in the very house where she was expected to stand beside the king. Her voice stayed controlled, but only just. The queen consort was not pleading for money. She was fighting for belonging. William stayed seated for one beat longer. Then the prince rose slowly, meeting her anger without raising his own. He told Camilla the matter was no longer about insult. It was about protection. The reserved properties and funds were tied to a legacy bigger than any one person, and he would not allow uncertainty around them to follow his children into the next reign. Camilla turned toward Charles and pressed him to intervene. The king looked down at the file instead of answering. That single movement landed like abandonment. He had not spoken against William. He had not rescued her from the moment, and the silence made clear that the balance inside the palace had already shifted. William opened the file and delivered the final blow. The order had already been signed into household effect, meaning the internal royal system had accepted it and begun acting on it. This was not a negotiation. It was a notification. Camilla left with her face pale and furious. But wounded pride was only the beginning. Because the moment she walked out, the palace machinery began moving, and every corridor seemed to ask the same question: who truly holds control now? Power in the monarchy rarely announces itself with raised voices. It appears in calendars changed without explanation, offices locked out of old permissions, and courtiers suddenly answering to a different door. After the confrontation, William's decision moved from emotion into execution. The order became a living thing, traveling through private secretaries, estate managers, and household records, and each signature made Camilla's loss more real. William's office moved first. The prince did not need another confrontation, because the authority had already changed hands. Estate records, the official files showing who may manage royal properties and money, had to be updated. Household approvals, meaning the internal permissions that allow royal offices to act, had to be rewritten. Access lists had to be corrected. Every quiet adjustment mattered, because Camilla's influence did not disappear in one speech. It disappeared one permission at a time. A senior courtier watched Camilla's private secretary receive the revised access list and go completely still. The queen consort's office had once moved through those channels with confidence, asking questions, requesting updates, expecting answers. Now the instructions were plain. Prior authorizations no longer applied. William's household would become the controlling channel, and every estate manager connected to the Queen Mother's reserved properties and funds would answer through the prince's side. Camilla's secretary read the page again, hoping the meaning might soften. It did not. The courtier saw the moment land, and the silence between them carried more force than any announcement. This mattered because palace power depends on routine. Whoever controls the routine controls the result. If Camilla's office could no longer ask, approve, or direct, then the queen consort had not merely lost access. She had lost visibility. Charles sat with the file later that evening and removed his glasses slowly. The king placed them beside the papers, then left his hand resting near the seal, as if touching it might explain what he had allowed. He was torn between husband and heir, but the monarchy had already begun answering to William in a new way. The prince was no longer being treated as a man seeking permission. He was being treated as the next reign taking shape. One sealed memorandum deepened the blow. A memorandum is a formal written note used to record instructions or decisions, and this one showed that the Queen Mother's legacy had always been intended to remain insulated from personal court politics. That meant William's order was not just emotional. It had roots. It had a reason. It carried the force of memory. The seal had done its work. Camilla's loss had moved from private shame into palace procedure. But administrative control was only the beginning, because the first practical consequence would strike her in a place she could not hide from herself, and the next morning would prove what losing access truly meant. The true force of a royal punishment is not always felt when it is announced. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the ordinary rhythm of a morning that suddenly refuses to obey. For Camilla, the fallout began not with shouting, but with a locked archive, a delayed estate call, and a staff member unable to meet her eyes. That was when the decision stopped being political and became painfully personal. Camilla arrived expecting the scheduled briefing to begin as usual. The reserved property under discussion had once moved through her office without resistance, because her staff had been treated as part of the normal chain of authority. A chain of authority means the order of people or offices allowed to approve decisions, request information, and direct action. Now that chain had been cut and tied to William's side, and the queen consort was about to feel the change in a way no formal letter could soften. A young aide stepped forward before Camilla reached the meeting room. His voice stayed low, his hands stayed still, but he could not meet her eyes when he said the briefing had been cancelled under new instructions. The queen consort paused, and for one sharp second, the silence around her felt more humiliating than any headline. She asked who had issued the instruction, though she already knew the answer. The aide swallowed before speaking. "The Prince of Wales's office will handle that now." The words were simple. They were almost gentle, but they landed like a door closing in front of her. Camilla kept her voice calm, because anger would give the room what it was waiting for. Still, her expression changed. The queen consort understood at last that William's order was not symbolic. It removed her from real decisions, real funds, and real influence. Palace staff adjusted quickly, and that speed wounded her most. Property consultations were redirected. Financial approvals were paused. Calls that once came to Camilla's office now passed elsewhere. This mattered because royal power often hides inside routine, and once the routine changed, everyone could see who had been weakened. The distance between her household and William's office became visible without anyone needing to say it aloud. Charles heard of the cancelled briefing before lunch. The king asked one careful question, then gave no public correction, no statement, no sign that Camilla's authority would be restored. His restraint deepened the sense that she had been isolated at the highest level. He did not humiliate her openly. Yet by doing nothing, he allowed the humiliation to stand. Camilla returned to her room with the cancelled file still unopened. The queen consort had lost more than a meeting. She had lost the comfort of assuming the palace would obey her place within it. By nightfall, the building had changed around her. But the true turning point came when the argument moved away from offices, aides, and documents, leaving only two people in a room. After the noise of orders, offices, and consequences, the decisive moment arrived in near silence. No secretary stood by the door. No advisor softened the language. No courtier could rescue anyone from what needed to be said. William and Charles met alone, not as institution and heir, but as father and son, facing the cost of a decision that had protected the crown while wounding the family. William entered the king's study late that evening, carrying no file this time. The king's study, the monarch's private working room where personal judgment and royal duty often meet, felt heavier than any formal chamber, because nothing in it could hide the truth. Charles had already heard how Camilla discovered the cancelled briefing, how the queen consort stood silent while a young aide explained that the prince's office now held control. That mattered because the order was no longer sealed language. It had become pain inside his own marriage. Charles did not begin with anger. He asked whether William understood what history would call this. Not a simple governance decision, not a careful act of estate control, but a personal judgment against Camilla. The king's voice stayed low, yet every word carried the strain of a husband who had watched his wife lose ground, and a father who knew his son had chosen the crown over comfort. William held the silence before answering. The prince said he understood the blame would come to him, and he was prepared to carry it. He would rather be called harsh now than leave confusion for his children later. That mattered because the monarchy William would inherit could not survive on blurred authority, private resentment, and assets passed through offices no one fully trusted. The future king had decided that pain today was safer than disorder tomorrow. Charles turned toward a framed family photograph and looked at it longer than necessary. The king admitted, in a private recorded conversation kept later by a senior household advisor, that silence had become his way of delaying choices he should have made sooner. He did not say it loudly, he did not say it proudly, but he said enough for William to understand that the monarch knew exactly where hesitation had led them. The turning point came without drama. Charles did not reverse the order. He did not defend Camilla by undoing William's decision. Instead, the king acknowledged that his son had acted where he had paused, and that admission changed the room. The prince had drawn a boundary. The monarch had allowed it to stand. William left with no victory in his face. Charles remained behind, looking older in the quiet. Father and son had reached an understanding, but the palace could not hold the story much longer. What began behind closed doors now moved beyond the gates, where newspapers, broadcasters, and crowds turned one royal order into a national reckoning. By morning, the monarchy's private rupture belonged to everyone. The silence of palace corridors was replaced by headlines, broadcasts, and crowds gathering beneath stone balconies, where history always seems larger than the people trapped inside it. The public did not see the files. They did not hear the private arguments. but they understood the image instantly. William had acted, Camilla had lost ground, and Charles had let it happen. Camilla saw the coverage at breakfast and set her cup down untouched. The queen consort did not ask for the sound to be lowered. She did not ask who had briefed the press. She watched as a broadcaster described the order as a defining sign of William's future reign. A future reign means the rule that comes when the heir becomes king, and that phrase cut deeply because it placed the prince's authority ahead of her pain while Charles still wore the crown. William watched another broadcast in silence as Catherine stood beside him. The prince heard commentators praise his firmness, but praise did not make the room lighter. Catherine understood the cost without him explaining it. Public approval could protect a decision, but it could not heal the wound inside the family. William had drawn a boundary, yet success carried suffering. And the future king knew Camilla would feel every headline as a fresh removal. Buckingham Palace answered with discipline and cold restraint. The official response confirmed a restructuring of oversight, meaning control of the Queen Mother's reserved properties and funds had been reorganized under a new authority, but it offered no emotional explanation. Palace language often reveals what the family cannot say plainly. This statement did not comfort Camilla. It did not defend Charles. It simply told the world the decision stood. A major London newspaper made the private wound impossible to soften. Its front page showed Buckingham Palace gates beneath the headline, "William takes control of Queen Mother legacy." People stopped at newsstands. Phones lifted near the palace as a crowd gathered by the gates. One broadcaster called it, "the clearest transfer of moral authority before the crown itself changes hands." And the phrase traveled faster than any correction. Charles heard the line later and closed his eyes. The king understood that the public was not only watching Camilla's loss, they were measuring his hesitation against William's resolve. Camilla left the breakfast room before staff could pretend not to notice, and the silence behind her felt louder than the broadcast she abandoned. Public opinion favored William's firmness, but approval was never the final answer. When the headlines faded and the gates grew quiet again, only the emotional truth remained. A family had been forced to choose what the crown could no longer avoid. In the end, the order was never only about properties or funds. It was about whether the monarchy would continue absorbing private tensions in silence, or whether someone would finally draw a line and accept the pain that followed. William's decision hurt Camilla, exposed Charles, and changed the atmosphere around the crown. But it also gave the institution something it had been missing: a clear boundary. Camilla sat alone after the public storm passed, with the file resting closed in front of her. The queen consort no longer touched the pages as if another reading might change them. William had stripped her of access to the Queen Mother's reserved properties and funds, and the decision stood. That mattered because those properties and funds were never just useful resources. They had become a symbol of her place inside the royal structure, a sign that the family had allowed her near one of its most guarded legacies. Charles came to her later, but he did not arrive with rescue in his voice. The king understood that the monarchy had absorbed the shock by choosing legacy, succession discipline, and future stability above personal accommodation. Succession discipline means keeping the path of royal power clear for the next generation, without confusion over influence, money, or authority. Charles knew that choice had protected the crown, but it had also left Camilla wounded in a way no public statement could repair. Camilla closed the file herself. The gesture was small, but it carried surrender. She was no longer fighting the order, because she understood it would not be undone. The queen consort had lost more than access. She had lost a symbol of belonging, and the quiet sadness between her and Charles showed that even marriage could not soften what the crown had decided. William did not celebrate. The prince stood with Catherine later and spoke with restraint, telling her that necessary choices could still leave scars. Catherine listened without interrupting, because she understood what he meant. The future king had protected the Wales line, but victory had not made him lighter. It had made him older in spirit, more aware that power often demands pain before it gives stability. Charles lost something too. The king lost the illusion that silence could protect everyone. His hesitation had allowed the crisis to grow, and William's action had revealed what Charles could no longer hide. The monarch still wore the crown, but the moral direction of the next reign had begun to show itself through his son. The true revelation was not that William could issue a hard order. It was that the prince had begun behaving not like a man preparing for power, but like a sovereign already carrying its burdens. He had wounded the present to secure the future, and that choice became the emotional verdict of the entire crisis. There is no unresolved mystery left in this moment. Camilla lost a symbol of belonging. Charles lost the comfort of delay. William gained the authority of a future king, willing to draw a painful line when the monarchy needed one. The crown survived, but it survived by becoming colder, clearer, and more firmly William's than ever before. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.